Welcome to ENG 4E. This is Term 2A, Class 13. And our assignment for today is the culminating activity for Unit 1, which is going to take us today and tomorrow, and maybe the next day. We'll see how that goes. I'm Jillian Percy. If you are trying to reach me, the best way is by email, jillian.percy@nnecschools.org. You could also find me on Facebook, capital G, capital P, ERCY, space, capital W, AHSA. Previous classes are on YouTube at the same address. Sorry, I literally just signed in. It shouldn't be signing me back out. For those over in Radio Land, for some reason, Google always wants to sign me out, and I can't quite figure out why when I just signed in. Maybe because I'm switching computers from the computer at my desk to the computer over here, but it is frustrating. Okay, so today's work. We are going to understand how to do the planning or the brainstorming to write a short story. We're going to work on understanding and applying what we know about character, understanding and applying what we know about setting, understanding and applying our understanding of different types of conflict in stories. And then if we have time, we're going to begin to work on our rough draft from our brainstorming. If we don't have time, we'll work on that tomorrow. Okay. I don't know if you've read any short stories recently, right? Like we all do in school. And the one in this course, we actually end up doing a novel. We don't really do short stories that I know of right now. There are some Canadian short stories online. You can also often find short stories of fanfics. Sometimes famous authors will have little free short stories, ones that they didn't publish, but there's kind of extra there for you to kind of read. So if you haven't read short stories recently, it is a great idea to go over there and try and read a few to get an idea of how they sound, because they do have a slightly different feel to them than a novel, right? They're not usually as complex. There's not usually as much happening just because you have a shorter time period. And we have a very short, it's only about a page and a half, which isn't too much. So before we get started, we're going to talk about the writing process, which I'm sure you've probably heard before. There are 5 stages. The first one is what they call pre-writing or planning. I often always think of this one as brainstorming, which is why I tend to call it brainstorming, but it's the same idea. In this first stage, you're going to gather and generate ideas on a subject. And the main goal in this stage is just to get your ideas flowing and put them on paper. Mapping and brainstorming are 2 types of pre-writing activities. And then we go on to stage 2, drafting. In this second stage, you're going to begin the actual process of giving shape by designing a rough outline and writing a first draft. Now, some people would put outlining as part of pre-writing, which I actually think it kind of is. It doesn't matter so much as long as you understand that they're separate stages, right? The words and phrases from stage 1 are put into sentences in this stage, but usually sentences that will need some work. That's why I always think of the outlining as being part of brainstorming, because at that point, I'm more thinking about what order things are going in. I'm not actually doing the writing part. Then in stage 3, the revising, you're going to look over your piece of writing to make sure the ideas flow smoothly and that it makes sense. Lots of times there's things that made sense when we were thinking it, and then when we put it on the page, we realize, oh, we forgot to mention this, or, oh, I skipped this one step, or, oh, I need to add some more details to make it clear to somebody who's not familiar with this. So then you make changes to improve the piece. You can do that by adding, cutting things, replacing things, reordering. If you're using a computer, it is easier to change all the different text using things like WordPerfect, Microsoft Word, Google Docs, whatever program you're using. All right. Stage 4, editing. Sometimes people confuse revising and editing. Editing is where you're going to do all the little fussy bits where you look at your spelling, your grammar, your punctuation. This is the first time you really need to worry about these things. Obviously, if you know how to spell and your grammar is great, you don't have to like throw that out the window at the other stages. But when there's things that you're not sure about, what I would do when I'm writing is I just put like a little quick underline of, hey, check this later, right? Because you're doing so many changes, hopefully, in the revising stage, then there's no point making everything perfect, and then you're going to throw it out the window, right? Um, it can also, for some people, lessen the creative process when they get really down into the nitty-gritty of like punctuation details and grammar details, then it can kind of put a freeze on beginning to write anymore because people get worried about, well, am I doing it right? And then they don't want to write at all because they get kind of nervous, essentially. Um, Proofreading is checking for typographical errors in the final copy. For example, when I'm typing really quick, I always spell the wrong. My fingers seem to have the order wrong. I always end up spelling it TEH. And especially if I'm typing quickly, I have to go through and make sure I've corrected that, right? I know how to spell it. It's just when I'm typing, I mess that up all the time. Stage 5, publishing. Now, for us, it's pretty simple, right? The final stage is writing the final copy and giving it to me, basically. If you were writing as in a different format, it might be giving it to your boss to look it over, giving it to a publisher, sending it to a magazine. Essentially, the idea, though, is that you've written as well as you possibly can, and now you're ready for someone else to read it, and if you're doing it professionally, hopefully to buy it. The other thing to keep in mind is that this is not a 1 to 5 stage process. In other words, let's say I did some planning here, and then as I was doing my drafting, I suddenly realized, oh, there's some things I forgot. I'm not like locked into this step. I'm free to go back and start doing some more planning. Same thing if I'm doing revising. If I'm revising and suddenly realize, you know what, I need to throw out this whole paragraph altogether. It just doesn't make any sense. I'm going to rewrite this right from the start and redraft that. That's fine too. So it's important to know because sometimes it sounds like once you in this stage, you can't go back, but that just isn't the case. Even when you're publishing, right? If you send me in something and you're unhappy with the mark, you're always free to take it back and resubmit it after you do some changes, right? And which is true even in the real publishing world, right? Your editor or your boss or whoever might make suggestions of things they want you to fix. So here is officially what it says. The culminating activity is writing a short story based on one of the following topics, which aren't mentioned quite yet. We are to plan, develop, and produce a short story using the writing stages or steps. This is worth 80 marks, so please take your time with this. That is a huge chunk of this unit's marks, okay? A short story will contain the following elements. A setting, which is your place and time, characters, plot, which is your series of events, a theme, which is the author's main idea or purpose, and then a conflict. It says depending on your topic, but I think it'd be pretty hard to write a short story that didn't have some sort of problem or challenge. Um, Here are the possible topics. I don't know why that came unformatted. Hang on a second. 1, a trip I will remember. 2, growing up in your community. 3, a scary or frightening experience. 4, a happy occasion or event. 5, a valuable experience as a student. The length of the story, the final copy has to be a page and a half on your computer at a size 12 or size 13 font. Some people have misread that and are only giving me a half a page. Nope, it's one whole page and then another half. It makes a difference, right? You can write a much more longer, complicated story if you're working for a page and a half there. Grading scheme. The cover page, it should include a picture or a sketch, your name, the course, the date. That's worth 5 marks. That's an easy 5 marks. The rough copy is 25. I don't need to see your brainstorming. It will usually be really obvious when I see your rough copy if you've bothered to do the brainstorming. Then after you have done that, you're going to go through, do the revising and do the editing, and there should be significant changes. Okay and then hand in the new copy, that is worth 50 marks. So I should see some big changes between the rough draft and the final copy because this is doubled. So there should be some huge changes. The rough copy should be handwritten and the final copy should be a computer printout. Remember that in your final copy, be careful with your spelling, grammar, and punctuation because they count more there. Length. Like I said, a page and a half once it's typed on your computer. It's hard to translate that into how much it would be handwritten because everybody writes at different sizes. For the computer printout, it's assuming that your margins are 1 inch and your font size is around 12 points, which is typical. And then using a typical font like Times New Roman. I forget what I'm using right now, probably Calibre or Calibre or Arial. Those will work too. Generally, this would mean your story is around 750 words. So if you're handwriting and you're not really sure if you have enough, give a quick word count, okay? Please make sure your story is long enough or it's going to be difficult to accomplish everything you need to in that limited space. Okay, so here they've developed a little tiny organizer. To me, it's a little bit too tiny. I would need more space, but it gives you the idea. This is for the pre-writing or the brainstorming stage. Once you've decided on a topic, you can fill in the blanks with little words and phrases to create an outline. And by doing this, your story should be a little easier to develop. So they can tell the topic, what's your setting, which is where and when, your characters, your theme. I would not put the theme here. I would put theme after the plot. I think as you start to think about the obstacles and what they've got to overcome, the theme becomes more obvious. I think if you try and decide it ahead of time, it's a little bit tricky. Resolution, or basically how the story ends. Okay, the topics they've chosen are things that could be fiction, like could be made up, or could be nonfiction, could be things that have actually happened to you. And that is entirely up to you which one you choose. The stories could be 100% true. Every single thing happened. Or it could be mostly true. Maybe some of the things happened, but you've added some other bits to make the story more interesting. Or it could be 100% made up. None of it is true, and you've entered the whole thing. Any way you want to tackle this assignment is fine. I am focused on whether a story is interesting, not whether it is true or not. And here's my thing. I actually, for me personally, think that sometimes writing fiction, like things that are made up, is a little bit easier than writing nonfiction. Because nonfiction, you're kind of stuck with what actually happened. And sometimes what actually happened wasn't that exciting. Like most of us have pretty ordinary lives. We're not really living Mission Impossible type lives, right? So I feel like fiction's easier because I can add all sorts of crazy and wild and interesting things. But that's just me. Okay. You are welcome to write however you want to write. Okay, setting. Every setting is made up of two main elements, the place and the time. Place is where it will happen. And that can be a very small area or a very big area. Maybe all the events just happen at a high school or at someone's house, or maybe they happen in a small town or in a submarine under the water or a plane up in the sky. I can think of all sorts of movies where that was the setting, right? Some stories might have characters traveling from one city to another, or even from one country to another. Like we're watching a show right now, FBI International, and they're traveling, from Bulgaria to Russia to who else knows where they're going to go next, right? Some settings can even be imaginary. It could be an imaginary city or country, but in the real world, or it could be a completely made up world, like Game of Thrones or Lord of the Rings. Or you could be on other planets with aliens and made up creatures. That's just fine. The other element of setting is time. Sometimes the setting is in the past. It might be the near past of like the 1990s or set farther back in the 1800s. Some stories might be set in medieval times or even in prehistoric times. There was a very famous series that was set in like caveman times, Clan of the Cave Bear. Stories might also be set in the future, might be in the near future, like say 10 years down the road. What might happen with specific issues such as pollution or global warming or food? Sometimes it might be set in a far future where the world looks nothing like it is today and it's not really very clear how it got to that state. Stories can also be set in the present. It could be like the absolute present, like right now, this year. You'll see that in TV shows sometimes, like when COVID happened, a lot of TV shows that were set in the present automatically started having their characters wearing masks because that was what was happening in the real world. Where with like a historical show like Game of Thrones, what's happening in the real world wouldn't have any effect on their story. It could also be in the present, but say a few years back, maybe 5 or 10 years back, where things would not really be significantly different. Okay, character. We discussed setting first, mainly because they listed it first in the little planner. But if I was actually making up a story, I would probably start with the character first. And then I would think about what this character is like. Um, I've got the word his here, okay? It's just generic. When I was growing up, his was a generic one for any gender. It just was the stand-in for people. So substitute whatever pronoun you want there. His, her, they, it doesn't matter. Whatever the person is. How tall is the character? What is their age or gender? Or do we want to leave that ambiguous, right? Some stories do that. How do they dress? Keeping in mind their setting might affect this, right? Winter clothes in the north versus winter clothes in Florida are going to be pretty different. What is their body type like? Are they skinny, fit, athletic, plump? What color is their eyes, their hair, their skin? Do they wear makeup? Have jewelry on? Do they have tattoos or piercings? You don't have to describe it in detail in the story, but it helps if you know what they look like, because then you can, drop little bits and pieces of that as people are interacting in the story. Okay. That was the outside. Obviously, we also need to know what they're like on the inside. How do they treat their family, their friends, and themselves? What do they believe about right and wrong? Do they even care? Are they loud or are they quiet? Are they funny or serious? Intellectual, artistic, athletic? What are their goals each day or over a longer period of time? Are they happy, sad, angry, frightened? Why? What's causing these different emotions? Do they like their life or do they hate it? Most importantly, what problem is this character facing? Generally, for a story, something has to happen, right? We're not just describing things. Usually, something is occurring. Maybe there's a quest, like fighting a dragon, getting a job, finishing school, meeting a girlfriend. A quest can be very tiny or very big. Maybe they have an enemy who's about to get them, a schoolyard bully, an angry boss, a jealous coworker, a vengeful boyfriend. Could be horrible monsters or aliens who want to take over the world. Maybe they're kind of fighting with themselves, trying to overcome an addiction or a bad habit, trying to pay the bills or be a good parent, struggling with some sort of big decision, choosing between good and evil. Maybe they're having a problem with society around them, social justice issues, being pressured to conform to something they think is wrong, trying to fit in with a society that keeps rejecting them, trying to escape a society that won't leave them alone. And could also be problems in nature, fighting a terrifying animal like a dragon or a shark, trying to live through a natural disaster like Hurricane Katrina, or a flood, or a drought, or a tornado, trying to survive a difficult environment, especially if it is unexpected, such as the desert, the Antarctic, the rainforests, or out in the ocean. I'm giving you kind of some of the wildy, like big over the top ones, but your difficult environment could be something as simple as like an office where everybody's angry, right? A natural disaster could be something as simple as a blizzard. Like yesterday, if you had the blizzard, but say you had a sick child who had to go to the hospital, it's a tiny little moment, but it can seem really, really big in light of what's going on. I remember reading Stephen King's Cujo. That's one of his older ones. And the entire thing is Cujo's this dog and it's got rabies, and it's kind of implied that there's supernatural elements. But basically, this guy is trying to get his daughter, I believe, out of the hot car and safely into the house. But he can't get past this dog. And it becomes this terrifying story. And yet it's based on two really small little elements. What? A scary dog. And two, it's dangerous to be in a hot car in the summertime. And yet it's an entire novel based on those two tiny little elements. So it doesn't have to be big and unusual like a dragon. It could just be an angry dog, right? Okay. Once you've got your problem, that is the heart of your story. You really can't write any farther until you've kind of settled on these three main elements. Who's your main character? What problems or difficulties are they facing? And where are they? This is important because where are they can affect what tools or people or technology they may have to solve the problem, or the setting could be part of the problem. Like if you had a sick child that needed to get to the hospital and you were here yesterday in the blizzard, the fact that you're living in the north is part of the problem. Whereas, what if you were having a problem and you were on a boat out at sea? Well, then the setting of the sea becomes part of the problem. Or the time frame could be a problem. Let's say, for example, something as simple as pneumonia, right? That can be solved pretty easily today through antibiotics. But if you go back 200 years ago, that was more or less a death sentence. You weren't going to survive it. So the setting can be a huge part of your story and how easy or hard it is to solve the problems. I wanted to just talk about the main character thing really quickly. If you're writing about yourself, I feel like sometimes that can be really hard. I'm not discouraging you, but I am saying sometimes you got to kind of think about, okay, how would I look and sound to somebody else? Or how do I want to look and sound in this story? And sometimes it can be really tricky. It can be uncomfortable to describe how we look, or hard to look at our personality and see what our strengths and our weaknesses are. So if you're writing yourself as the main character, like especially if it's based on like a true story, right? Something that really happened. Be mindful of that. What I find is sometimes people are so uncomfortable that they just don't tell the reader anything. And so then we have no idea what they look like or how old they are or what their personality is like, because it just never gets mentioned because you're writing from your own point of view. So if you are the main character, be mindful of like, what do I want to express in this story? Am I wanting to express how brave I am, or that I'm very funny, or that I have mixed feelings on this topic? And then how can I show that? Can I show that through the things I say, my dialogue? Can I show that through my actions? Do I need to show that through other people's reactions? Like, for example, let's say you're having a bad day and the washing machine broke down. So you're not wearing your normal work clothes, you're wearing your weekend clothes and you're dressed really casually. And so you have a different character. Somebody in your office says, "Oh my goodness, what's going on? Why are you dressed that way? Normally you're so sharp." And then you could be like, "Well, I looked down at my grubby gray sweats, la la la." All of a sudden you're getting a visual of how you look, but it's prompted by this person in your office making a comment. And so it seems natural in the context of the story. So keep in mind that if you're the main character, you're going to have to find ways to show us how you look or what you are like inside through the story. Okay, that's really important. Okay, if I'm kind of giving you the sort of the logical way to go about this, but you know, I'm not super logical myself. Sometimes the logical way doesn't always work for people. The other thing that I've heard a lot of writers talk about is the idea of what if. Sometimes a lot of great stories just kind of start with the idea of what if this kind of crazy thing happened, and then you think about all the different events that could happen about it. So, for example, what if power hungry leaders around the world fought to be the ruler of all? That's the basic premise of Game of Thrones, which led to huge books, very successful. What if a doll came to life and tried to change the world for better, which is the premise of the Barbie movie? What if a young boy had magic but didn't realize it until he became a teen? All those kind of what ifs can give you a little story starter if that's kind of more useful for you. Now you've got your character, you've got their quest. Now you got to stop them, which sounds funny, but every great story has obstacles. It always seems like all sorts of things get in the way of the hero or the heroine trying to solve their problem. But as a writer, that can be the best part. It's kind of fun. What realistic or crazy obstacles can get in your character's way and stop that character from achieving their goal. In a long story like a novel, it might be several large, detailed problems. In a shorter story, it might be several smaller problems that are more easily solved. Now, keep in mind, if you are trying to base this on a real event, sometimes it can be hard to see the obstacles. Like you might be thinking, oh, that's just my crazy coworker who's a little difficult. Well, in the context of your story, that person's an obstacle. Or it could be something simple like, yeah, I'm kind of scared of spiders. But if the context of the story is your kid fell into a pit of spiders, that tiny little phobia becomes an obstacle getting in the way of you helping your child. So sometimes you have to take a step back and look at your life as if it were a movie and think about what were the obstacles that happened in this that were getting in my way of trying to achieve whatever you were trying to achieve. Okay. So again, if you're writing a real story, keep in mind you may have to work a little bit harder to think about how would this look from the outside because you were actually there on the inside. Okay. Remember that the basic premise of where problems can come from in any kind of story is really it's pretty universal, right? From all over the world, all different times, stories that we have from really long ago, myths, legends, religious writings, and everything. There's generally these main types of problems can be categorized, right? Problems in nature, problems with other people, problems with themselves or ourselves, essentially, problems with our environment. That is a type of nature. I just kind of separated it a little bit because I think it makes me think of things like the desert, right? Whereas nature makes me think of like animals and I don't know, things that are living. I don't know why. Um, that's just me. For you, you may not need that. Society or their peer group, right? Could be as simple as like kids hanging out at a school, or the people that you work with in your office, or the people in your community, or the people in your profession, whatever, right? Society can have an influence and can be one of the obstacles that get in the way of our meeting our goals. And then technology. This is one kind of newer one. Keep in mind that technology doesn't have to just be things like computers. Um, it can be something as simple as electricity, or it could be any tool, right? When things like a bow and arrow were invented, that's a type of technology, it's a type of tool, right? So new improvements or new discoveries in any area of technology can be helpful to society or helpful, but in the context of a story, it might have new problems, right? So these are some of the categories that you can use, okay? Just to kind of get your thoughts kind of going. So let's say that the main character we have in our story is called Larissa, and she's been ordered to bring a special parcel to the king, but she needs to make a long and difficult journey to do so. So I'm going to try and think of problems for every one of these categories. Now, in a short story, I'm probably not going to use all of them because it's too many, but just using my creative juices to get going and thinking about the different problems can kind of help me figure out which problems are useful and which are sort of too far-fetched. So, Larissa, maybe nature. Wolves begin to stalk her group as they leave the safety of the city. Other people, maybe there are enemies of the king attempting to steal the package. Themselves or yeah, I don't know how to put that. She runs into an old friend about to start her dream job as a blacksmith. Does she run off from her current job to become a blacksmith? Their environment, maybe they run out of water just as they begin to cross the desert. Or maybe they run into a river, but they have no boat. Society or their peer group. Some of the comrades have hidden the water because they don't want the king to get the package. Maybe people that are within her small group are actually working against her. Technology. Her map has been tampered with and they've been on the wrong path for days. How will they ever find the correct path to the king? Um, it could be like a wagon breaks down, the horses get sick, Technology is kind of referring to the devices and the tools around us. Okay. Remember, it doesn't have to only be things like computers. Okay. That's sometimes we tend to think of technology as a synonym for computers, but it's not the only meaning. Okay. Now, all of this stuff, I use kind of a general wild kind of idea just because I think it's easier. Um, but this works even with more realistic stories. So again, in a short story, these wouldn't all happen because that would begin to seem ridiculous. You could write a very funny story that way, though, if you wanted to. So here I'm going to do with a more realistic premise. Greg is trying to get the dream job that makes more money, has better pay, and is doing work he loves. But things keep getting in his way. Technology. Maybe his car breaks down on his way to the interview. Other people. Maybe the receptionist seems to have taken a dislike to him and she's not passing along the message that he's here for the interview. Or maybe she's saying mean things to him and suddenly his courage and his confidence are going down. Themselves, maybe suddenly this person has an anxiety attack and they're convinced they're not skilled enough for the job and they have to like go to the washroom and pull themselves together because they're feeling overwhelmed. Their environment. Maybe they suddenly develop a coughing fit due to the heavy amount of perfume the receptionist is wearing, or maybe I think it's something else. Maybe they left their cane at home because they were afraid that would look bad for the interview, but they're really needing it. There's a lot of stairs to climb. I guess what I'm trying to point out is there are real life obstacles that we all face. We just don't often think of them as the kind of obstacles you can write a story about, but you absolutely can, right? Society or their peer group. Maybe there's several other people there waiting for their interview too. And he's getting kind of worried. Some of them are better looking and they have more experience than him. Maybe they're saying things. Maybe he knows some of them and they're, again, making put downs and saying, hey, have you mentioned this horrible thing that you did in the past or whatever? Nature. This is a kind of a wild one, but hey, right in the middle of the best job interview he ever had, a thunderstorm causes the power to go out, ending the interview horribly early before he could share his best work stories. Yet the interviewer thinks, oh, that's good, I've heard enough, right? This is all talking about more realistic things that could happen, right? I'm just trying to get across the idea that problems don't have to be big, crazy problems. They can be tiny little problems. For a short story, that's perfectly fine. Okay. You can use these different types of conflict to help brainstorm different types of obstacles that will get in your character's way. You're probably going to only need to choose maybe 2 to 4 of them, depending on how big an obstacle it is and how quickly your character can solve these problems. But getting a little crazy and thinking of all sorts of the problems can be kind of fun. And it gives you some great ideas you might not have gotten if you tried to play it safe and just think of 1 or 2. Now, again, the chart for me, I write kind of big and when I'm brainstorming, I scrawl all over the place. I might write over 2 or 3 pages, even for something short. But that's just me. Not everybody writes big. But for me, the chart that they gave us up top, it would not give me enough room to brainstorm information to write an entire short story. So I might have one whole page that is just my setting and another whole page that is just my character. And I might have several pages of ideas on my different problems. You don't have to do that. I'm just pointing out that you don't have to try and fit all your ideas on that tiny little chart. Okay. So I'm going to use the problems, or at least some of them, that I invented for the character Larissa. Okay. I'm going to go back and start to imagine or describe, or maybe even draw my main character so I can picture her going through the events of the story. Now, if you haven't had a chance, sometimes it's hard to describe because we haven't really pictured her. So, one thing to do when you're looking at your character kind of mentally in your mind is think about what do they look like? And you're trying to picture them in your head. If that's a hard thing for you, another thing you might do is go through Google and start pulling up images. Like I want a tall, professional looking woman. I want a short, heavier man who looks really scruffy, and just kind of pull up some images that can give you some ideas of how to describe somebody. Okay. That isn't the only way you can do it, but it's one way if you're having trouble picturing things. So here I kind of pulled up a generic, well, I guess not generic, but a picture of a female knight, because that was what I was wanting. I don't know about the whole cloak thing, but I liked that it was a bit ambiguous so I could imagine things. So here is my description of her. She's tall. She's maybe 5 feet, 11 inches. She's got brown hair and eyes, pale skin. She's very athletic. She's young. Maybe she's 25 to 29 years old. Her father was a weapons master, so he trained her how to fight. Sadly, he was killed in the last battle for his king. As I was writing this description, it actually helped me um, picture her more clearly. And that's kind of our goal, because it's hard for me to write a story about somebody that I don't understand very well. Okay, that's just her outside. Yep, now I got to think about her inside. What is my character like inside? Keep in mind, this would include her relationships to other people. So in my mind, my character's a bit lonely. She's missing her father. Her mother died in childbirth. I know that's convenient, but I I want the mom out of the way. Does not really have many friends because there's not a lot of girl fighters, right? So she doesn't have many people to hang out with. She's honest to a fault and sometimes offends people with how honest she is. Because of this, though, she doesn't talk very much and is quiet because she doesn't want to offend people. She's very serious. She does not take things lightly, sorry. She's grateful to the king because he's looked out for her, but she's a bit overwhelmed by this very serious assignment. She's serving the king out of loyalty to her father. I don't think she knows the king very well herself because she's still pretty young. I picture the king being a lot older, like a good 20 to 30 years older. She's very practical. She enjoys working with her hands, enjoys being outside. She's not really interested in marriage yet. She's still very focused on survival as she's mostly alone. I picture her as being not like super, super poor, but maybe not owning very much. Maybe she doesn't have a house because the king lived at the castle with the, sorry, not the king, her dad lived at the castle with the king, right? Maybe they have a very small hut. Maybe she's kind of got the clothes on her back and a little bit of food. Um, Maybe I give her a rich aunt who could help her out if she gets in trouble. That's a maybe. I don't have to put that in there. It's just kind of my way of having sort of an emergency rescue person, I guess. I want that there just in case I need to have it. So now I need to put her into someplace. And as you can see, I've already got some ideas going on. I'm going to give her an imaginary kingdom called Casalra. It's part of a much larger continent with many other countries. And this land varies a lot from country to country and includes things like jungles, deserts, temperate regions. My story is going to be set in the past. Okay. Technology is still low. There's no planes or cars, but they would have instruments for navigation, like for boating and stuff, telescopes. I'm not sure what all. I'd have to look up what other navigation tools they would have. War instruments. I don't think they would have guns yet, but maybe swords, arrows, maybe some catapults. Not sure what else would work. Okay. Now, after I have these three main sections planned out, I need to think of a beginning for the rough draft. I always like to brainstorm various possible beginnings and then choose the one that seems most interesting to me. So, like, how am I going to start the story? Maybe when the king gives her the quest to deliver this package. Maybe when she's picking out the companions and she's gathering supplies to help her on the quest. Maybe she's in the middle of the first problem or obstacle and she can kind of have a flashback to why they're here. Maybe she's having some sort of heated dialogue with somebody to establish her character, like maybe a fight with some guy while she's out of armor. I picture her like maybe she's at a tavern and some guy is trying to like pick her up or something and she's just like, oh, I don't have time for this. Maybe there's a description of the scenery so other people can picture her where she is. Maybe there's some sort of internal questioning about the importance of this task. Is it important? Should I bother? Should I quit? That kind of thing. These are just some ideas, right? As I'm writing, other ideas might come to me, but this kind of gives me a chance to think about stuff. Okay, where am I next here? Now, after the planning is all kind of done, or mostly done, getting started is the hardest part. A lot of times, I really don't like the first bits and pieces I write, but I write them anyways. If I waited until I loved all of my ideas, I would never get anything written at all. What I sometimes find is that after I write it, then I begin to see what's wrong with it. And then I've got a better idea of what I need to do to make it right or to just start writing fresh. But having said that, it's still kind of hard to do. And even professional writers find it hard to do. Now, sometimes that means that you need to spend more time trying to picture details of the setting or the characters to be able to bring them to life. That is one of the big things. Sometimes when I go to write, well, I can't quite picture her. Well, then of course you can't write. You need to spend more time picturing things before you're able to write about what you picture, right? So for this story, I went online and I just gathered some pictures. These aren't pictures that are going to show up in the story. They were just trying to give me some ideas for how I wanted things to look. So here was kind of an idea for a house. And then I wanted to picture a horse in armor. I don't know if I'm going to use this because armored horse would be like a horse in battle. And I don't know if they're really going to be in battle. But somehow that was important to me at the time. Swords. You can see here's a very simple sword. This might be like a fancy sword that a king would use. And then I might want to picture something else. So I'm using Google Slides, but you could use anything. I could go up to Google and just put any kind of item. Maybe I want to picture medieval clothing. Okay. I want to picture what she's wearing or what other people might be wearing around her. Images. Okay. I click on images, it's going to give me a whole bunch of things. This is kind of what we picture sometimes as a queen, but of course, not everybody was queens. Let me think here. Oop, this is all sorts of stuff, right? From different countries and stuff. And then we've got, I think here, here's a whole little video on medieval clothing. Um, Medieval clothing terms that might be helpful to me. I guess I'm thinking kind of loosely about medieval stuff. Here is simpler outfits, not here's a very simple outfit for a guy. This might be a nun, I'm not sure. So I might gather up a whole bunch of these pages, right? Just to have some ideas for how I want to describe people. And I could do that with the setting as well. Um, Medieval villages. Maybe I'm trying to picture the village going on. Villages. Okay. So I like this. This gives me a little map. That might be what the king's place looked like, or maybe it's the village that she's in right now. Here's some useful pictures. Again, I might grab some of these, stick them on a document page so that I've got them to refer to. What does a medieval village look like? Oh, this is really useful. Look at that. Pastures, church, fields, gardens. So I'm just trying to point that out that if you're having trouble picturing things, by all means, you can look through books or internet to give yourself some ideas, especially if you're using a not real place, like a fictional place. Okay. Um, Now, once I tried to start writing my rough draft, and then I realized, you know what? I'm still not ready. I think I need to take my brainstorming and put it in order. And the official word for that is called outlining. Okay. So, first of all, I thought about the beginning. In the beginning, somehow I need to introduce Larissa. I need to get across her relationship to the crew of people she's traveling with. And somehow I need to introduce the quest or the problem for the king. I'm not even sure how she gets the quest because if she's trying to take it to the king, how did the king get the message to her in medieval times? I haven't figured that out yet. I probably need to stop and take some time to figure that out, right? So is there a letter? I'm gonna do that right now, just kind of show you what I mean. A letter, um, another knight tells her about the quest. Maybe the king was traveling. Ooh, I like this. And he had the package, but needed to give it to her. for safety. Maybe there's somebody in his entourage that he doesn't trust. Ooh, I like that idea too. All right. Doesn't trust someone in his entourage. Doesn't trust someone in his entourage. Okay. So this is what I'm talking about too, is sometimes as you're writing, even just doing the brainstorming, you begin to get ideas. Whereas if you just kind of don't write anything and are just kind of frozen, it can be really hard to get started. So even if you don't like what you're writing, go ahead and get started and see how it goes. Then the main part of the story, most of the story is going to be her overcoming the obstacles. So what are some of the obstacles I think she could have? Maybe the competency and loyalty of the crew is in question. She doesn't know if she can trust the people she's with or whether they're effective enough to be able to protect her. Larissa has to prove herself. Maybe they get set upon by thieves. Maybe they get lost because the map has been tampered with. Maybe they're being followed by some sort of enemies that attack them. Maybe there's some sort of deadly environment or conditions. Maybe some of the crew get hurt or killed or they quit. So that's kind of my main idea. And then somehow I'd have to wrap it all up, get the package successfully to the king. And story's going to end where she gets some sort of official role in the king's entourage. I'm not sure what to call that. Is she a knight? Do I need to make up some other name? Now, this is a lot of obstacles for a short story, right? Especially if it's only a page and a half. So I probably need to pick a few less obstacles. I think my major obstacle is going to be Larissa's trying to prove herself to herself. She wants to show that she can be a good leader because she wants that, but also she needs to show she's a good leader to the other people in her crew, or they're not going to listen to her, right? And getting over the obstacle successfully and completing her mission successfully, like actually getting the package, that's all part of this. And that goes into the theme. Theme. And I always have trouble explaining the theme. To me, I don't know, I have a hard time putting this into words. Like the theme is a young woman is learning to trust herself, to solve problems and lead other people. And I don't know, what's the message? Believe in yourself? Sounds a little bit simplistic. That's why I have trouble with themes, right? I don't, you don't have to ever say your theme. I think if you write a story well, the theme becomes kind of obvious. But for this planner, they wanted us to name it. Again, you don't even have to show me your planner, so don't worry. But you should kind of mentally have a theme. Okay, so putting my ideas in order, as you can see, it led me to more questions because as I was doing it and I went to write and then felt, ooh, I feel a little panicky, I realized I hadn't thought through some of my details, not me details, my details enough. And that's fine. All I did was take the time to write some quick notes and do a little more planning. So, for example, as I was going to write about her crew, I realized I hadn't spent any time thinking about her crew. I didn't give them names or ages. I don't know what they look like. I haven't figured out what skills they have. I need to spend a little bit more time writing about those other characters in order to be able to write the story. And I don't want to have too many characters because, again, I only have a page and a half. So we don't really have time now because we're just running out of time here. But what I would do now is take a little bit more time and write out that crew. Give them some names, quick descriptions, quick list of their abilities. Okay. So I didn't necessarily think we were going to be talking the whole day about brainstorming, but in all honesty, it's probably the most important part of this assignment. If you take the time to brainstorm well, you're going to write a better story. Tomorrow, we will talk some more about what to do with all your brainstorming and how to get your story going, basically. If you are stuck and need any help with anything, by all means, message me. I'm here at the office till about 1:30, and then back in the office later on from 4 to 6:30. So if you want to call me, I'm available, or again, Facebook. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will talk to you guys tomorrow.